Senator Hancock, you're recognized to suspend the regular order of business on committee substitute for Senate Bill 6.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the regular order of business and take up and consider committee substitute Senate Bill 6 at this time, relating to the liability for certain claims arising during the pandemic or other disasters or emergencies. The ultimate goal of committee substitute Senate Bill 6 is to protect well-meaning healthcare providers, first responders, large and small businesses, religious institutions, nonprofit entities, and educational institutions from frivolous lawsuits related to COVID-19. The committee substitute for Senate Bill 16 supports the heroes that have been on the front line fighting this pandemic from the beginning, with supplies non-existent and the effects were still unknown. The bill simply extends protections that already exist in medical emergency situations and healthcare entities that have been battling the pandemic emergency for over a year now. Committee substitute Senate Bill 6 allows Texas to continue reopening safely and will bolster a global leading economy by giving businesses the assurance that they will not be forced to spend their hard-earned resources fighting off frivolous lawsuits. Importantly, this legislation does not shield bad actors. This is not an immunity bill. And I will have a few amendments to speak on here shortly. We began looking at this legislation as a bipartisan piece of legislation to move the Texas economy forward out of the pandemic, and I'm pleased to know that that goal will be carried out today. With that, I move suspension.
Senator Hall, for what purpose?
To express some concerns with the author and ask some questions.
You can express your concerns on final reading, but you can ask questions now.
Okay.
Do you yield, Senator?
I do yield.
Okay. Senator Hancock. I'll wait till the final link because these are concerns.
That's probably a better time, since we have amendments as well, so your concerns may be alleviated.
Senator Gutierrez, for what purpose?
Mr. President, just for a few questions.
You yield?
I yield.
Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Hancock, you and I had a discussion earlier, and I just wanted to clear something up for a few constituents. And this was a concern that I had earlier because I was intending to vote no on this, and I've switched my vote. We don't need to get into causation issues. I don't really see a big stream of cases like this coming, but I understand in the abundance of caution we want to make sure that our courts are not faced with this logjam, and that's understandable. And my question to you was based on something that I found this morning. I think you got it covered. I just want to make sure that it's covered. If the local Wendy's or the local, restaurant, taqueria, whatever it is, if they are short on cooks and they know that the line cook that they have has COVID, they would not get protection. In other words, if they know that 3 of their employees or even 1 has had COVID and they're out there cooking the food because they have a shortage of workers, and that owner knows that he cannot avail himself of the protections of your particular legislation, correct?
Well, and we'll have an amendment that will help clarify that. But Senator Gutierrez, we have no desire to protect those people that are not following health and safety guidelines, protocols in there. We also don't want to force protocols on individuals where their local officials may have not implemented them. So we're going to clarify that as well. But yes, and I want to thank those involved, all the parties, to make sure that this bill protects the people that deserve to be protected and absolutely does not protect those individuals who do not deserve this protection.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I just wanted to make sure that that was clear. We cannot protect bad actors. Thank you for your efforts here. We appreciate it, and thank you, Mr. President.
And thank you, Senator. And as you know, we've had stories of bad actors, and that's why we wanted to make sure we worked with all sides to make sure that there will still be litigation. There's 650 cases today. There will be litigation due to those people who do not follow proper protocols and did not properly take care of the health and welfare of their customers as long as they're employees.
Members, the vote is on suspension. Secretary will call the roll. Are there any objections? No objections?
You thought that was going to be harder, didn't you?
The rules are suspended. Chair lays out on second reading Committee Substitute for Senate Bill 6. Secretary, read the caption.
Committee Substitute Senate Bill 6 relating to liability for certain claims arising during a pandemic or other disaster or emergency.
Members, there is an amendment. Secretary, read the amendment. Members, the amendment is on its way. We'll hold for a second. Following amendment, Secretary, read the caption.
Floor Amendment Number 1 by Hancock.
Senator Hancock.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. And this is really just technical corrections on this amendment. We do have a couple of others as well.
Do you want to lay out the...
I'll go ahead. All we're doing is removing the obsolete reference to subsection in Section 4 of the bill. That's all this one's doing.
Any objection? Hearing none, amendment is adopted. Members, following amendment. Secretary will read the amendment. We'll let you get it back to the back row.
Floor Amendment Number 2 by Hancock.
Senator Hancock, on your amendment.
All right. Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this amendment protects a business which, at the time of the injury or death or the following guidelines, even at that time, the guideline was to conduct business in a normal fashion without restrictions. And I can give you specific examples in my districts where the county guidelines were different than a specific city, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't put guidelines on people operating within a city that may have been operating under normal guidelines.
Members, any objection? Hearing none, amendment is adopted. The following amendment. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor Amendment Number 3 by Hancock.
Give it one moment here, Senator Hancock. Please lay out the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, this is simply a technical change. As drafted in Section 5 of the bill, it speaks to educational institutions and specifically cites colleges and universities. But just to be crystal clear, and because Baylor's national champions, we've added the reference to the specific section of the Education Code to cover all of our various types of higher education institutions.
Did I hear Baylor's national champions?
I didn't throw that in there.
Okay. Any objection, members? Hearing none, amendment is adopted. The following amendments. Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor Amendment Number 4 by Hall.
Senator Hall, you're recognized on your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President and members. There is currently no legal duty for a business or individual to protect a person from exposure to a disease. SB6, as presented, would actually create that duty by requiring a business or individual to jump through hoops to prevent liability they would, apart from this bill, not have. For example, a person who refuses to close their small business deemed by government as non-essential and ordered shut down, even if they followed all the protocols, would be liable for exposing an individual to a disease, while a big box store with far more customers and opportunities to expose an individual would not be if they were implementing guidelines. To its credit, the bill does require reliable scientific evidence to show that the failure to follow protocols was the cause and the effect of individual contracting disease. One of the problems we've had in this pandemic is getting reliable scientific evidence. How much easier and less lawyer-centered would it be to just say that there is no liability for an individual or business for exposure to the disease? This amendment would simply replace the language in the bill for Section 148.003 with language that says that a person is not liable for injury or death caused by exposing an individual to a pandemic disease during a pandemic emergency unless the claimant established that the person intentionally exposed the individual to the disease. Mr. President, I move adoption.
Senator West, for what purpose?
Question of the author.
You yield?
Yes.
What does the bill currently say?
Pardon?
Is this addressed in the current bill?
No, it's not. I mean, it's a very convoluted following guidelines that were laid out, and we got conflicting guidelines throughout it. Wear a mask, don't wear a mask, 6 feet distancing, 10 feet distancing, all kinds of different guidelines and so on that it's hard to tell what somebody was really doing. This simply would reduce it to you only have a liability if you intentionally intended to infect someone.
Don't you think it should be knowingly as opposed to intentionally?
Okay. Either way, yes, that's fine. Knowingly.
Could we? I'd like to hear from the author on the bill as it relates to the amendment. But if he's inclined to make it knowingly, I can live with that as opposed to intentionally.
That's a good idea.
What the author wants to do.
That sounds good. The chair recognizes Senator Hancock.
Yes, thank you. And members, what this amendment does is it provides blanket immunity. So, Senator Gutierrez, as you were pointing out, this would protect actors that are making their own rules, and that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to strike a balance here, and we're not looking to protect the bad actors in industry. We want to protect those that are doing things right, doing things properly. But this amendment does not do that. It strikes the balance that we have in the bill, and for that reason, I'm tabling the amendment.
The chair recognizes Senator Hall to close.
Okay. Well, I think this bill actually creates liability that we don't currently have, and by simplifying this to state that someone knowingly exposed them would be a much simpler way to address this rather than getting to a very complicated process of what rules were valid, when were they in effect, and who did they come from. Move adoption.
I have a microphone on. Okay. Questions of the author of the bill?
Senator, we're on a motion to table the amendment. Can you hold? Okay, thank you. The questions on the motion to table the amendment, and the Secretary call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Buckingham, Campbell, Creighton, Eckhart, Gutierrez, Hall, Hancock, Hinojosa, Huffman, Hughes, Johnson, Colcourse, Lucio, Miles, Nelson, Nichols, Paxton, Perry, Powell, Schwartner, Sulliger, Springer, Taylor, West, Whitmire, Zaffarini.
There being 29 ayes and 1 nay, the motion to table prevails. The following amendment, the Secretary will read the amendment.
Floor Amendment number 5 by Johnson.
The chair recognizes Senator Johnson on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Senator Hancock, for your work on this bill. I know I'll just assure everybody who hasn't observed the process that Senator Hancock has worked from the very beginning with every constituency. There are still constituencies all around that aren't completely happy with the bill, but everyone acknowledges that the interests of everybody has been listened to and accommodated. This is yet one more piece that Senator Hancock and I have looked at. There is a higher standard of negligence that's applied in the context of COVID in the medical malpractice arena. This amendment would make it such that if the pandemic disease is not a cause of the injury that's suffered in the context of the treatment, that the higher standard of negligence would not be available to the physician. It puts the burden on the claimant to establish that the pandemic disease was not the cause or the contributing cause to the harm suffered. So it simply protects physicians in the context of COVID and healthcare providers, and it protects patients also, and allows them to have a standard of negligence if they can show that the pandemic disease was not a cause.
The chair recognizes Senator Hancock on the amendment.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate Senator Johnson bringing this amendment. This amendment can basically just confirms the balance that we're trying to find within this bill, and so therefore it's acceptable to the author.
The amendment is acceptable to the author. Is there objection? Hearing none, amendment's adopted. And the following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment. The secretary will read the amendment.
For amendment number 6 by Hall.
I reverted back. The chair recognizes Senator Hall on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members, the governor took extraordinary action during the past year in declaring a disaster, suspending laws, and imposing restrictions on Texas citizens without ever calling the legislature into session to offer concerns or directions on the way things are being handled. SB6 and some of its legislative findings would serve to put a legislative stamp of approval on all the actions taken. That would be a misrepresentation of how things really occurred. My amendment would remove 3 legislative findings. Finding 1, that the widespread of COVID in this state has resulted in a state of disaster as declared by the governor under Section 418.014 Government Code. Finding 3, that the current time there is no certainty as far as how long this crisis will last. And finding 11, that provides that while some prior rights will be impaired by this act, the impairment is not significant to our rights. And the interest of protecting the public and ensuring adequate care vastly outweighs those rights. While the declaration of emergency made sense when PPE was limited, there was a panic about the spread of the virus, and hospitals and healthcare workers were overwhelmed. That is not where we are today. It is inappropriate to apply the same standards to where we are today, where we were a year ago. While we still have COVID, it would be disingenuous to claim we still have a crisis. Finally, I don't know about you, but I have not yet met a constituent who believes that their rights that have been impaired have been insignificant. When your business goes out of business because you are closed down by the government to prevent the spread of a disease, it is not insignificant. When you're refused the ability to be at the side of a dying family member because of government restrictions on visitations, it is not insignificant. And when you're not allowed to visit a loved one in a nursing home for months, it is not insignificant. And when you're prohibited from worshiping in the church of your choice, it's not insignificant. And when your government prevents you from earning a living so you can feed your family by declaring you non-essential, it is not insignificant. It's obvious, members, that our objectives here are not the same on this bill, so I will just be pulling this bill down, this amendment down.
Senator Hancock on the amendment.
I believe the amendment's been withdrawn.
Members, the amendment was withdrawn. Senator Hancock, you recognize passage to engrossment.
Yes, Mr. President, I move passage of engrossment, committee substitute Senate Bill 6.
Secretary will call the roll if there's no objection.
Alvarado, Bettencourt, Birdwell.
29 ayes, 1 nay. The bill passes to engrossment. You're now recognized to suspend the constitutional 3-day rule.
Yes, Mr. President, I move to suspend the constitutional rule that bills be read on 3 several days.
Secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Bettencourt, Birdwell.
29 ayes and 1 nay. The rule is suspended. Chair lays out third reading and final passage. Committee substitute for Senate Bill 6. Secretary will read the caption.
Committee substitute Senate Bill 6 relating to liability for certain claims arising during a pandemic or other disaster or emergency.
You're recognized on final.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Before I move final passage, I would like to commend your staff, my staff, on the wonderful job they did on taking what could be a very confrontational bill. Tort reform is not often passed on this body, And most importantly, I want to thank the members who provided input and felt comfortable coming with our office being open, wanting to hear their input to make sure that we got just the right balance to protect our constituents, but make sure we get our economy going properly. And so shout out to my staff and the wonderful work. And really all those, we covered every industry and religious institution. Everyone who was involved in this and provided input, and that is what you see in this bill. And this will help Texas resume the strong economy we had pre-COVID. With that, I move final passage.
Thank you, Senator. Secretary, call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Bardwell, Blanco.
29 ayes, 1 nay. The bill is finally passed. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, members.